a skiing do from my homeland. Used to have one of my own back in the day. You should take it, boy.
Yes, boy. Take it. We might need to butter bread somewhere in our travels.
This is why no one likes you.
So welcome back to Honored Madman, and today we're going to answer the age-old question, is Mimir Celtic? Which is an interesting question. I mean, if we're being straight up, the Mimir from Norse mythology, not having anything to do with God of War, that version is not Celtic at all. In IRL Norse mythology, Mimir is essentially just an advisor of Odin, who was killed and beheaded by the Vanir gods during Odin's conquest against them. And after his decapitation, Odin would keep around Mimir's head, which was said to recite forbidden knowledge to him, much like he does in the game.
Big footprint.
Smartest man alive.
Well, except for secrets about Baldur. That might seem a little odd and even, morbid or whatever. But think about it, Mimir is the smartest man in the world. It was essentially like keeping Google in your back pocket. And since nowadays we all do that, I think we can understand that Odin was being understandable here. So that basically sums up Norse mythology's Mimir. And God of War's Mimir shares a lot of similarities with this version as well, but this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. The Mimir we meet in God of War was originally a fae known as Puck or Robin Goodfellow, a figure from several European mythologies. He's also the narrator of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was a play by Shakespeare that I had to do when I was in like 7th grade. Luckily I wasn't in the play, I just operated the curtains, but I definitely remember a character named Puck. Anyway, in God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, Mimir makes several references to this past. He tells the story of the Midsummer Night's Dream to Kratos. He claims during this time that he was an errand boy for a fairy king, likely the King Oberon from Midsummer Night's Dream. He talks about how him and his fellow fairies were sent to basically just cause mischief throughout the lands for their king. The king was pretty much cool with Mimir and the other Goodfellows, just kind of running around causing havoc, as long as he found their antics amusing. He also talks about Avalon and Nimue, the Lady of the Lake. So it seems like Mimir spent a good amount of time in the Western European mythology sphere, but he lived this whole life in a different mythology or a different land before he, as he puts it, headed north and changed his name. Which, as far as we can tell, is because his king finally got tired of his antics. Or at least that's all he tells us. So that just means Mimir is the character from A Midsummer Night's Dream. How does that imply or prove that he's Celtic? Well, it kinda doesn't. However, fae, or fairies with an E, are beings in Celtic mythology, which they're not exclusive to or anything, but Mimir having a Scottish accent, and when exploring Tyr's Temple in 2018 God of War, you happen across a Scottish sock knife traditionally worn with a kilt that Mimir remarks is from his homeland. The knife is known as a skeindub, and it's a pretty memorable moment from the game. Mimir offers the knife to Atreus, and Kratos encourages him to take it, but not before letting Mimir know that that happens to be what's called a butter knife. But this, along with his familiarity with Kelpies, the shape-shifting water horses from Scottish mythology, implies that his homeland was originally Scotland. Or if we're calling all these areas by what mythology they are, it would probably be Celtic mythology. Mimir and Puck aren't necessarily figures from Celtic mythology or anything, but this God of War version is. He was a Celtic fairy who traveled through many mythologies until finally ending up in the Norse one when he took on the name Mimir, after traveling north for supposedly a pretty long time. So Mimir in Norse mythology, much like the character of Farbody who Kratos sort of becomes, isn't a particularly prominent character in this pantheon, but the writers of God of War's lore use this as a way to bring in Kratos and the character of Puck from Shakespeare and English mythology into the Norse realms and still play significant and prominent parts. For example, the father of Loki and one of Odin's most trusted advisors who gets turned against him following a betrayal, which I think really enriches the roles of these characters and the lore as a whole, because it shows us that Kratos isn't the only one who's traversed all these different mythologies. And I mean, it gave us one of the best video game sidekicks I've seen in a long time. Not since Midna from Twilight Princess have I enjoyed a sidekick character more than Mimir. He's basically a walking encyclopedia of not just Norse mythology, but like several different ones. And he's lived this extremely interesting life. It's probably been stated numerous times in other God of War videos that people may have made, but Mimir as a character just enriches the whole fucking game series. There's never a dull boat ride, there's never a dull climb, and the fact that him and Kratos have this shared experience of being from a faraway homeland is likely what leads to them becoming like the best of friends, to the point where Kratos even considers Mimir a brother. And I think using Kratos and Puck to sort of become the avatars of the characters of Farbati and Mimir allows what would be sort of background characters of the mythology to become extremely important to the plot and story and be expanded on much further. The character of Farbati really only has one notable trait or action, and that is just being the father of Loki. His name translates to Cruel Striker, which I think fits Kratos perfectly. It also translates to like Angry Striker and Dangerous Striker. All of these fit Kratos brilliantly. And I like that because that gives more depth to what would be a literal background character. A lot more depth. Like if I ever read about Norse mythology now, I will always think the character of Farbati as Kratos. And it's quite the same with God of War's version of Puck. For example, Mimir is greatly expanded on in the God of War universe. His actions and what he did to end up as Odin's advisor, and then what he did to fall out of favor with Odin, along with all the atrocities committed in the Allfather's name, which further separates him from his actual mythology counterpart, who, as far as I could find, did not build a bunch of mining rigs in Svartalfheim or trick the dwarves, imprison the Lingbacher, all that. None of that happened in the mythology as far as I could find. Those are all new additions to God of War's version of Mimir. When Mimir first came to, let's call it Scandinavia, he quickly wound up in service to another king. He would quickly become this king's advisor, and he vouched for a warrior named Hrolf. Now, Hrolf would eventually usurp and betray this king that Mimir served, and Mimir would feel really guilty about all of that. This is something that Mimir would never forget though, and he would still hold this grudge up until the events of Ragnarok. But after his king was killed, he wandered again for a time until he came across Odin. Mimir, being the cunning trickster that he is, saw this as the perfect opportunity to pull one over on the Allfather. Either aware of Odin's gluttonous hunger for knowledge, or just lucky, he provided Odin with something known as a Mimisbrunner, which is a supposed mystical well of knowledge, but it was actually a well laced with some psychedelic mushrooms. He basically tricked Odin, the Raven King Allfather, into tripping balls on mushrooms, to the point where Odin ripped out his own fucking eye, but Mimir assured him that now he had a greater sight than he could have ever possibly imagined. And seemingly convinced, Odin took Mimir into his service and gave him a position as one of his advisors. Now this does differ from what Odin says happened to his eye. He says he lost it when he peered into that rift in time that's underneath his longhouse. This could just be one of those instances like with Tyr's hand, how Tyr was supposed to be missing a hand because it got bit off by Garm. And when we meet Tyr, well, fake Tyr, but when we meet real Tyr at the very end, he's got both of his hands, and Mimir basically said, well, he's a god, his hand grew back. So it's very likely that Odin's eye just grew back after he ripped it out, and then he later lost it after he peered into that rift. For his part, Mimir did try to counsel peace whenever he could when it came to serving Odin, and seemingly he was well loved across all of the realms. The giants loved him, they gave him the Bifrost gem eyes that he has, although when he was drunk he was originally going to put him on his nipples. He basically tricked the dwarves into serving Odin because he knew that if he didn't do it that way, Odin would just roll over them roughshod and take what he wanted anyway at the cost of numerous dwarven lives, likely. So he did a number of bad things in the Bay of Bounty, installing all of these furnaces that made the whole realm gaseous as hell, trapping a Lingbacher, which is essentially a mythological whale, and using it as a source of lantern oil, which was likely painfully mined from this poor creature by unpaid dwarven workers. Mimir would also attempt to negotiate a truce between the Vanir gods and the Aesir via a wedding between the goddess Freya and Odin the Allfather himself, although this union mostly just caused her own people to resent her, even her own twin brother Freyr, who I refer to as the god of erections from the Northman. He's honestly quite deserving of a video himself. But yeah, the Vanir hated Freya after this because they saw her as a traitor, because she essentially became an Aesir after that. But it wasn't all else for Mimir. He also came to love a very beautiful Valkyrie named Sigrun. Sigrun herself had a very complicated past. Her brother killed her previous lover after her previous lover had killed almost her entire family. It's a whole thing. Almost George Martinian. But yeah, this Mimir, he's done a lot of shit in this world, and he regrets the most of it. He still has regrets that he's carried over from his previous homeland, such as failing to save the Queen Titania. But Mimir would eventually fall out of favor with the Allfather. Likely due to his friendship with all the giants, Odin began to suspect Mimir of betrayal. Now, I don't think Mimir actually betrayed Odin at all. In fact, I don't think it's stated anywhere. In fact, this could just be a case of Odin's self-fulfilling prophecies. His paranoia about prophecies leads to him sending Thor to go massacre the giants, which in turn leads him to distrust Tyr and Mimir, simply due to their friendship with the giants. Odin would imprison the unfortunate talking encyclopedia atop the highest peak in Midgard, and bound him to an indestructible tree like some kind of one-eyed albino that killed his brother and banged his sister. Shoehorned Bloodraven reference. But this was basically where Mimir would remain until Kratos found him, and chopped his head off and brought him to Freya to reanimate it. Now, I found this pretty interesting because in the actual Norse mythology, Mimir is killed and beheaded by the Vanir, and in God of War's mythology, he's technically killed by Kratos and brought back with Vanir magic from the literal Vanir goddess, who also happened to have no love for him. But Mimir was stuck to that tree for about 109 years, which in the grand scheme of things might not have been a large part of his life, but it's definitely a long fucking time to be stuck in one place, so it's no wonder he doesn't mind being carried around on Kratos' hip everywhere. But at the risk of getting more off topic than I already have been, that's about all I wanted to talk about when it comes to Mimir being Celtic and all that. As always, I hope you guys found this video informative. If you liked it, please consider liking. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about characters and fictional mythologies and lore, please consider subscribing. That would really help the channel. The internet was out for a couple days, so I'm a little more behind than I'd like to be right now. But without further ado, let's get to our outro, and then I'll let you guys know what's coming up next. So yeah, my upload schedule kind of got disrupted, but I'm back on things now. Next up should be either the Ranny video or the mystery lore video I've been working on, followed by another God of War video about a scene that I think might be the best in the entire game. But with that being said, you guys have a good one. I'll see you next time.
Do you regret it, Mimir?
Most likely. What are we talking about in particular?
Giving up your body?
Do I regret exchanging my life for my freedom? That's a question I ask myself every day, my lady.
What about today?
Today? Glad to be out in the world. How else could I spend such quality time with you?
Okay.
Brother, in my travels, I heard of a great battle in your homeland, at a place called the Gates of Fire.
The Hot Gates.
You were there?
No.
Is that regret in your voice?
I did regret not dying there for many years, but no longer.
Meeting the Lady of the Forge really brought back some memories. I thought it was only in my homeland you'd see such things.
Mermaids who forge weapons.
Aye. I remember very fondly a lake nymph called Nimue. Very talented with a sword.
Mimir.
I meant that literally. Shame on you. She made the best swords in all the Isles and had big dreams about what she'd do with them one day. I wonder what became of her.